Follow the White Rabbit is a game that will teach you practical politics. Practical politics is called practical politics because it is non-voting, which makes it very, very practical. Conventional politics is, of course, rule-based politics, which is what you do at the voting booth. It's very, very rule-based and timeline-based, you know, every 4 years, every 2 years, so on and so forth. And full-spectrum practical politics is engaging and taking out an opponent or a system or a corporation, so on and so forth, by any means necessary under the rules or under the laws, but never breaking the rules or never breaking the laws. But to understand anything, we first have to teach you practical politics, which is non-voting politics. The first basics are the art of staying on point or using a talking point and being able to say it over and over again to make your point, not arguing, just making a point. But this is an introduction again to Follow the White Rabbit, and Follow the White Rabbit is a game that will teach you practical politics. We're going to be talking for the next little bit about probably one of the most significant events that's happened since World War II. The détente, or the global powers post-World War II, have generally been the Anglo elite New World Order. And of course, everyone knows our front groups, the Hebrews, so on and so forth. But we're going to talk about what happened in Iran. We had another one of those wonderful colored revolutions. And if they're calling it a revolution, of course it's not a revolution. But they tried to call it a revolution against Ahmadinejad. And it was, believe it or not, brilliantly run. Much better run than Georgia, than the Rose Revolution in Georgia, than the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, than what we saw in any of the Baltic republics or anywhere else they've tried this. It was very well run. And basically, you got a front row glimpse at the game they'd been running. What happens is when you get an opposition coming up for a vote, Mousavi's, or however his name is pronounced, his side was going to lose and was going to lose catastrophic. They started early protesting. Now, in Iran's case, let's give you some background. Iran does not have a long legacy with Islam. That's really just a fantasy. I mean, they do. Islam's been in there a long, long time, but most of the Iranians, most of the Persians, blame the Arabs and Islam for destroying the place. And there's a lot of contradictions. So there's two histories in Iran. There's one pre-Islam, which is pretty glorious. It's very Aryan, and there's still a lot of them there, believe it or not. If you've ever been to Iran, you realize that you're not dealing with Arabs, and there's a lot of them that the most modern Europeans would be right at home with. Ahmadinejad is probably the worst example of an Iranian. There are some places in Iran that are shocking. They are shocking because they are so European looking. But anyway, so they have a history prior to Islam, and there's been a lot of debate. No matter which side you come down on, even on Ahmadinejad's side, for and against. But there's a debate pro-Islam, against Islam, and there's a lot of internal confusion in Iran. And you've had one party in office for a long, long time. And anywhere on the globe where you've had one group in charge for a long, long time, you have a potential powder keg, because there's a lot going on the planet. There's a lot of things wrong on the planet, and people tend to blame the party in power. So Ahmadinejad was in power, and there was a vote coming up. And how they pull this stuff is this one was already had a little grassroots fire. Sure it did. He'd been in power a long time. His group, the whole group, he's just a front man for a big group. Big oligarchy there in Iran, and his group had been in power for a long time, so they had some student dissension. Then you had the crackdowns among the mullahs and whatnot. So they got it going, and how it works is when you're going into a vote, it doesn't matter whether you're going to lose. You most likely assume you're going to lose. You're going to scream foul, and so you start the protest into the vote, as if you were going to get ripped off, or you're going to push a negotiation. And what they were doing, what we saw the newest micro technology. What they were doing with the Twitter. That's www.twitter.com, Twitter. What they had done is they were using cell phones and Twitter. Twitter is a micro blog. It's a microblog that a lot of cell phones can access. So you can put up directions, whatever, and put it up on a blog and immediately distribute it over a massive number of cell phones. Or you can have two stages. You can have your control cell phones among the crowds, and then you can have the crowd, the ones that everyone can access. Kind of keep it tiered so you can control things. And it was very fast. But what I'll do is I'll back up a little bit and tell you about micro technology and how it got going. It first got going in this type of thing when the Berlin Wall came down. In my opinion, that was the first time we saw cell phones and laptops and little computers and bulletin boards and everything get going. The Nazis, or what people call neo-Nazis, are not neo-Nazis. There's no such thing as neo-Nazis, but they were National Socialists. And this was written about in Nazi International by Joseph Farrell. I was really surprised that he picked this up, and not, I don't know, it was Nazi International. I think it was Nazi International, Regular Black Sun. He's written all about this type of stuff. But when the Berlin Wall came down, when they got it going, many different National Socialist groups or like-minded German nationalists got it going with cell phones and what I would consider micro technology communications. And of course, it was the first time where you could have cell phones, people running around with cell phones, bulletin boards, different types of computer and information. In other words, information was flowing very quickly. Much quicker than copying machines, but all that was incorporated too. I wasn't there, but I know what they were doing. They were on cell phones and whatnot, and they were reunifying Germany. And he talks about this, about how fast they got it going, and how these different what he considered Nazi international control groups put it together. Joseph Farrell did in his book, but that was one of the first instances of micro technology. Cell phones, laptops, computers, in something like the Orange Revolution in Ukraine or the Rose Revolution in Georgia. They were generally using the internet, websites, and cell phones. Someone would upload something on a web page, blogs. I don't really remember how they used blogs, but typically then they would communicate that via cell phone. Well, the Iranian Revolution kind of took that to the next level. In other words, you were able to use this microblogging technology, Twitter, TWITTER.com, www.twitter.com, and you were able to tweet. That's what they call it. Tweeting is a couple lines. It's a microblog. You put a couple lines out, maybe directions, whatever. But what's interesting is it integrated the internet information flow with a cell phone. So anyone with a cell phone could immediately have access to information. And it was extremely fast. It was extremely impressive and fast how fast they got it going. But it was connecting the two. Instead of someone having to sit at a computer on a website and blog something, then communicate it over cell phones to the crowds, it's immediate. It's immediate. And of course, it failed. Yes, it failed. It had a better opportunity. It would have had a better chance than any of the revolutions they pulled. The Orange Revolution was horribly. It was horrible. They should have never worked, but it did. And how they get it going, and once they get the voting started, they get the crowds chanting. And it doesn't matter if your side's most likely going to lose, like in the Orange Revolution. But the people running Anglosphere, the groups that do this, they don't really care. The idea is to push a negotiation to make sure the government can't operate and to try to swing the election. And that's what they did in Iran, but it didn't work. Now, why didn't it work? Well, Mousavi's, the opposition, the loser side, within a week afterwards, or actually, I believe it was, I don't know whether it was 4 or 5 days afterwards, where they were still shouting. Every single meeting they've had since then, they shout death to Russia. And of course, no Iranian group has ever shouted death to Russia in, I don't know when. Before yours truly was born, maybe. They shouted death to the Soviet Union. But they're shouting death to Russia. So what's going on here? Ahmadinejad, in the middle of this attempt at Green Revolution, Ahmadinejad went to Moscow. Yeah, he went to Moscow. What did he go to Moscow for? Well, apparently to thank them. Yeah, he went to Moscow apparently to thank them for saving his skin. Because Moscow, what they're saying, and I'll just pass this around, is that the Russians basically gave Ahmadinejad a big heads up